Brandon Leonard, welcome to Dirtbag Rich.
Thanks for having me, Blake.
What is a dirtbag?
Well, historically, I think the origin of the term is people who lived in the Yosemite Valley in the 60s who chose to not participate in capitalism very much so that they could uh, climb rocks like El Capitan. So do big wall climbing. So like lived with very few creature comforts in pursuit of a bigger outdoor goal. I guess that'd be my best. That's my best, most factual answer. Nowadays, I feel like it applies to anyone who tries to like capture a little bit of that ethos. But I think I think of a lot of us had, not a safety net, but like a lot of people are just like, yeah, I live in a van. And like, it's not like you live in a van. You could go and retreat to your parents' basement if you needed to, or whatever, for the most part. That was the case with me.
Yeah,
So I'm
tell me
not,
about when you were a dirtbag or your most dirtbag phase in life.
yeah, I mean, I was like legitimately not making a lot of money, from, boy, 2004 to, I'm not making a lot of money now. I don't know what I'm talking about. But
But you're
like
probably
started
making more now.
Yeah, yeah. But like 2004 to like 2016, probably 2017, I was like, had a car I paid $4,000 for, spent every, moment outside of work either trying to make a little bit of money as a writer or go rock climbing or doing things in the outdoors. And then I think aesthetically my life was the most dirt baggish from 2011 to 2014 is just shy of 3 years that I spent living in a vehicle. So a Subaru Outback Impreza, which is a small Subaru that I could sleep in the back of barely. And then I upgraded to a $6,500 Chevy Astro van, that was in 2012, early 2012, and lived out of that for a little over 2 years. Yeah. And that was not a nice van. I don't know. I don't know if yeah, I remember a friend saying to me that Subaru all-wheel drive and Chevy Astrovan all-wheel drive are completely different things. But that was for better lack of a better it was my house for those years. I had a storage unit that I kept all of my worldly possessions in, and then the van, and I would just kind of tool around the West and return to my storage unit in Denver periodically to switch out, winter things for summer things, or if I needed a piece of gear that was in there or whatever. But yeah, so I lived out of the van, worked remotely, and did some stuff in the outdoors, and slept in a lot of, roadside pull-offs, the occasional national park parking lot, you know, national forest land, BLM land, and then got a hotel every, you know, 10 or 12 days to actually take a shower, and or I would pop by a friend's house and use their shower if possible. But yeah, it was like I didn't have very much money, but I was kind of like pretend poor, I was like,
Uh,
a friend of mine always said, just because you don't use it doesn't mean the net's not there. And
yeah.
were I really of differing means, and like if I was really down to my last dollar, I would probably that would be a much less comfortable way to pursue it.
Mm.
It was just like I was doing it because I could, and didn't have didn't have kids, a dog, a mortgage, anybody depending on me besides myself. Parents were both doing okay, everything. So it was easy. And I think you at the time I was like, I'm a dirtbag, and like, but you're kind of like you're not saying all the privileges you have, even though they might not be
Mm.
that big. It's not like I had a trust fund I was living off of, or really any money. But like you can live out of a van and live, freelance paycheck to freelance paycheck, knowing that like your last dollar is probably not your last option, I guess.
Mm. Hmm.
Sorry, that was a pretty long answer.
That's great. You and I met summer 2022 when I was cycling through Montana, and again a year later. and you have a pretty sweet house at this point. I got to hang out with you in the backyard.
Wow, do you
And
think so? It's like I don't think you came inside, man. It's
all right, all
anyway,
right, it
sorry.
could be a disaster.
We have a
Uh,
house, but it's like definitely not. I would not have called it a nice house when we walked in the
well, you
first
were
time.
building a really nice looking shed in the backyard,
Yep,
and I hear that's
that
finished now.
that is literally the nicest room in the entire house. Is the garden shed I renovated for my wife.
Yeah,
But yeah, I
yeah. So
know.
you have a house, you're married, you have a son. Do you still consider yourself a dirtbag in some way?
Ah. Not well, boy, that's a tough question. I don't think so. Like, what I was doing at the time, I would have called myself a dirtbag was pretty far from the original dirtbags. It was like I was spending a lot of time working on a laptop, and I don't even think, my wife lived with me. Well, we were dating at the time, so she's just girlfriend, but she lived with me and she was also a writer. So we were spending, I would say we were spending over half of our time trying to find Wi-Fi or, drum up freelance work or do the freelance work itself. Even though it was like not high paying gigs. And sometimes we actually lost money on the things we called work. But they led to other things or whatever. But I have this, I don't think that like those early rock climbers like Yvon Chouinard and Warren Harding, I would have a hard time explaining to them like how much I sit on a laptop and worked, whatever, despite what Instagram may have said. But yeah, now I don't know. I think like sometimes I think I like rejected a lot of the things I was probably taught or the society I grew up in was like valued, I guess. Like I was like, yeah, I'm not gonna be this sellout who gets a house and moves to the suburbs and has a family and blah 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 and becomes really uninteresting. And now I'm like 45 and I'm like, oh yeah, I did all that stuff. I guess that's where I am. So I think maybe I just succeeded in pushing it off later or in life, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Um,
you do have a very interesting life though, and you haven't just conformed to all the norms, even if you're playing house. Uh,
for sure.
for people who don't know you, can you just quickly summarize what you're putting out into the world and how you're making a living?
Oh, I really wish I could, man. That would be.
Ultimate
I,
challenge.
I think that's part of the problem behind my business plan. But yeah, so I started my career as a freelance writer and trying to write for outdoor adventure publications and was getting a lot of rejections. So I started my own blog, which when blogs were a thing in 2011, and that for to no real planning or grand vision on my end became what you would probably call a brand. So it's the website is semirad.com and I bought or I got the social media handles semirad. So that's kind of just become what I do. And so it's at this point or over the past, let's say 13 years, it's been a mix of writing, illustration, filmmaking, for clients and for just YouTube. Um, some sponsorships, book, some books I've written and gotten traditionally published, and books I've written and self-published. And what else is in there? Yeah, a little bit of photography. I've gotten paid for photos before. So that's kind of what I do. And like every week is just like trying to figure out which project to push forward a little bit. I write six newsletter posts a month, roughly. So that's the most regular thing. I do a little bit of illustration work for a couple of brands in the trail running um, market scene, whatever. Um, and yeah, I'm just figuring it out on a year to year basis. And every year, the pie chart of how I make a living is different. Um, so that's kind of what I do. And you're right. I have avoided having a real job since 2012. I think that's the last time I had a real regular paycheck with benefits.
What was that?
Um, a friend of mine got me a job writing copywriting for IBM, actually.
IBM.
Uh,
Wow.
yeah, didn't get me the job, got me the introduction and was like, okay, if you improve these guys, you can do this. I think, they're looking for people. And it was like, that was 2010, 2011 I got that, right? 2011, I think. Yeah. And it was yeah, I think I was making $30 an hour, had for your American audience, full health care benefits. I had dental insurance, which is like I thought was kind of unheard of, and it was fine. The work was fine, but it was like not really my jam in a lot of ways. And I was kind of doing that, for I think I had to have 32 hours a week to keep my insurance. And then the rest of the time I was trying to drum up more outdoor adventure writing gigs. And eventually after a year and a half at IBM, roughly, I was able to say, okay, I think I have enough regular work, in the adventure space that I can pull the plug here and just go out on my own. And it was like, I think I had like maybe $2,000 a month of guaranteed income, like before taxes, that I was like, okay, I'll make a go of this and see what happens. That was my last job, and I was like, I got $100 a month health insurance policy for, um, what do you call it, emergencies, basically, and was like, okay, I'm going for it. Um, and it's been that way ever since. I have better health insurance now, but like, yeah.
When you were in more of your dirtbag phase, what did you spend your time on? You mentioned a few things, but a lot of your writing has evolved to be about running and ultra running. What else is there? What do you do with all the time you've created for yourself?
Wow, when you put it that way, I'm like, I don't know that I have any more time, dude. And nowadays. But I guess just starting out, I think the thing that really grabbed me was rock climbing, and I started doing that in 2006. Yeah, and that was like the thing I did for like 7 years. Like if I would go on backpacking trips. I would do, whatever, do some mountaineering or just mountain climbing stuff. But I really wanted to rock climb, mostly. And that was all my stories, went around that. And eventually, you know, was able to write for Climbing Magazine, had a regular column there for a year or two. Um, and never surprisingly never got that good at rock climbing. I just like to be out in the mountains and
Yeah.
climb. And I think nowadays, I think really good climbers are more gymnasts than like the sort of mountaineers that I um, worshipped and like kind of wanted my adventures to be. Like I would rather walk 10 miles into something that would have no one else on it. And I think a lot of rock climbing nowadays is a much shorter walk to a like much shorter, harder routes that are very gymnastically difficult, compared to I just wanted to like tie on a rope and kind of go up mountains, for lack of a better description. But yeah, nowadays running is the thing I have time for, and it also is a place where I actually not really clear my head, but organize my head a little bit, or just think about nothing for a couple hours and let things just kind of flow. And then that's where I come up with ideas for creative projects, sometimes. And we'll have to stop on a trail and type in a note into my phone, or most recently, like actually did some voice notes for the first time that were semi-coherent, if I may pat myself on the back.
Wow.
You know, so you're like jogging and you're like, "Ah," and then this thing is blah, blah, blah. And like, and then, sort of transcribed it for myself when I got home. Actually came out okay. But yeah, like I've kind of just done a little bit of everything in the outdoor space besides whitewater kayaking. That's terrifying. But like a little bit of backcountry skiing, a little bit of backpacking, a little bit of mountaineering, a little bit of rock climbing, ultra running, lots of hiking.
Bicycle
Yeah,
touring.
bike touring. Yep. A little tiny bit of mountain biking, but I think I'm too old for it now. Not really that interested. Bike packing is like way more interesting to me, at this point. But yeah, so just kind of like all around, what are some ways to be outside, and it's all travel, really. Even a rock climber who's climbing a 10-foot tall boulder problem, it's travel, right? You're traveling over this small surface as opposed to this larger surface where I maybe bicycle across America or whatever.
Can you dwell on that
So
idea of travel? It's all travel. I read that as it's all movement.
Yeah.
And what is it just for you yourself? Where does this passion or obsession with movement come from? Where do you think what was the genesis of this for you?
Yeah, like maybe like movement and exploration in a small sense. Not like I'm finding new like things that I do are not new to the human race, but they're new to me, you know? So I guess when I actually moved to Montana the first time when I was 23 to go to graduate school to get a master's in journalism. And I thought at that time I was like, oh, the ideal thing would be to like write for Rolling Stone magazine, write about music or whatever. And I took a magazine writing class, and the requirement for grad students was that you had to get published before you could pass the class. And I thought, that is insane. Like, how am I ever going to convince Rolling Stone to like publish my story? And a friend of mine said, why don't you write something for Idaho Magazine, which is like this small magazine that she's like, they can take anything. They pay $40. And I was like, I mean, that's the pay is terrible, but like they take anything. I need to get published. And so I, kind of approached them with a story about this little 36-hour road trip my buddy and I did in Idaho the previous summer. And just a few, we climbed a mountain, we went to this national monument, we visited Hemingway's grave, and I think that was it. And they were like, yeah, we'll take that, sure. And that was my first publication. And I think um, that showed me I could do the things that I wanted to do anyway, and also make a living from them in some way. Obviously, like if you're writing articles for $40 a piece, even in 2004, you need to write many, many, many articles at that point to make a living. But it was like, oh, I can get paid for this. So it became this sort of uh, model of go out, do interesting things, come back, write about it or tell about it. Um, and that's just kind of what I've been doing the entire time. And, you know, y- you can just tell people the nuts and bolts of what you're doing or what you did. And there's all sorts of ways to do that. And a lot of people who are probably way more financially successful just do that, like talk about popular things like here's how to backpack in the Grand Canyon, or here's how to climb Mount Rainier. Here's the gear you need. Here's how long it takes. And I've never done that. I'm always like trying to find some other sort of lesson or, funny thing or some sort of scene. So it's just kind of this font of material. And it also might be because I'm lazy and I don't like to do reporting like in the newspaper sense where I talk to a bunch of people and then form a story around it and put it together. And I'm like, I'll just go do the thing and
I want to
see
go
what
do stuff that's
happens.
fun, and then I can write about
Yeah,
that.
I know. So it's like sloth basically, but also, you're not obviously that lazy if you're going out and like running 50 miles to like try to figure out try to figure out a story around it. But like we make stories out of anything. And like I grew up around storytellers, who could just like, some of the funniest things that ever happened to people were things that happened when they were on their way to work or at the supermarket or just like whatever. And it was like, if you can tell a story about that, surely I can go climb to the top of Mount Shasta and ski down and try to figure out something to say about it, or whatever it is you're trying to do.
Hmm.
So, yeah.
You've produced a lot of great stuff out there. I want to talk about two things in particular. One is the short film, I believe, for REI called How to Run 100 Miles. And I showed that to a group of my teenage students recently as an example of what people do when they move up Maslow's hierarchy of needs. When your basic needs for shelter and safety are fulfilled, respect, and then you get up into that narrow peak of self-actualization. I mean, this is where a lot of modernity's biggest questions and problems come from. And your movie, uh, it's like humble and touching, but also you're not lazy. You are not sloth-like, Brendan. You and your friend were out there. I mean, the training runs to do a 100-mile ultra marathon can be 20 or 30 miles long, right? You can be doing a marathon as a training run.
Well, with 100, you want to do more like 50 or
Oh
60
my gosh.
for the longest training run. Which we did. I think we did something like 52 or 50. I don't know.
As a training
Um,
run. Yeah.
yeah, and like I mean, I always have to clarify, you're not like an ultra marathon, you're not running the entire time usually. Like the general population is not. You're hiking the uphills and running the rest of it. And
Yeah.
so it's not like for someone who thinks of a running as like the New York City Marathon. Yeah, you're running almost all of that probably, but an ultra marathon, you're not. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, no, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you get to the top and you're like, oh, I've taken care of shelter and safety, and okay, I'm just gonna just like laugh in the face of all that stuff and disregard my shelter and my safety, and then go do this thing, and hopefully it
Mm,
translates into meaning. So.
yeah.
Um, I always think of those ultra marathons and trail running in general as being very safe compared to rock climbing. So I'm like, it's all the pain and suffering of mountaineering without the fear of death constantly. So,
You also did a wonderful job of describing this in your book, Ultra Something. And I just wanted to use those two as entry points into the question of like what is your obsession? I think a lot of people look at someone who runs 100 miles or look at someone who leads a dirtbag climbing life and says kind of what's their problem? And you can flip that around and say what's the obsession? What's the fascination? What's the you've been doing this for such a long time now. This is not just a phase in your life. So what do you think is it that keeps tugging at you and makes you want to do more and more in the outdoors?
oh boy. Yeah, I mean, part of it's just like um that's what people or that's where I can make a living, I guess at this point, I'm not trying to I'm trying a little bit more of like trying to share whatever I think is experience or knowledge in the creative world, but I don't think I am a very prominent voice in that. And there's a lot of people doing that. And the sort of the niche I've carved out for myself, you know, it sort of requires me to go out and do things in some way, even if it's just like hiking with my kid. Um, so largely it's like that's where I know how to make a living, and that's where my contacts are, and that's what my sort of quote unquote audience, thinks of me as. If I were to like go deep into woodworking, I think I would probably lose a lot of my income. If I was going to be like, hey, flipping things around this year, everybody, I'm gonna learn how to, do like really artistic woodworking, and I'm going to tell all about that journey, and that's going to be my writing career from now on. I think I don't know that more than 10% of my current readership would hang out for that, but who knows? So part of it's just like being scared of like not. I've dipped into it like a tiny bit, like other things, and like sometimes but generally always comes back to like that sort of idea of adventure, in the absolute broadest sense, where like having a child is an adventure, or just doing anything you're not sure of the result is an adventure, which is kind of every day for a lot of us. Um, so I don't know. I like it's I don't know if it's an obsession or just like um a rut maybe. But I like being in the rut. It doesn't bother me. So
Well, it sounds like you're describing audience capture. Like
hmm.
this is now built into your economic reality. But clearly there's some sort of transition or gradient here because you started writing about this because you loved doing these activities, and I assume that you love, yeah, being able to make money from doing something fun and meaningful, and and you've built this sort of small online empire out of that. Can you chart the transition of your relationship towards your work and making money from doing something you love? Because the answer you just gave me actually surprised me a little bit.
Hmm.
I'm wondering, do you still feel this this pull, this tug? If you didn't have to do it for money anymore, if you had some windfall money dropped into your account and that's it, you can just spend your time as you like. I mean, would you stop doing things in the outdoors?
Um, No. Right? Like, boy, yeah, that would be, yeah, no, it like all these sorts of things really, um, are, I believe, good for me in so many different ways. Like I commented to a friend that I don't really actually run that much. I only run about 30 miles a week, which is not very much for someone who does, ultra marathon distances, as far as like a few races a year, or like this year, I'll probably only do one race. But and he was like, no, that's actually still a lot of running. And I was like, yeah, you're right. I guess it is.
Hmm.
Just considering like people who are like, most people just go to the gym, I think, and they're like, however many hours a week they work out at the gym. It's like, okay, that's what I need to do to like stay fit and comfortable and like, at the whatever, weight level I want to be, or aesthetically how I want to look. And I'm like, yeah, like running 30 miles a week is kind of ridiculous, actually. Um, but it's good for me. I get, like that keeps me moving. It keeps my heart rate low, keeps my arteries clear, I hope. As far as all tests have proven to this point. Um, and it's like now it's become a place for me to think in the outdoors and like get my thinking done, because the rest of my existence, I'm very close to a lot of distractions. And so, yeah, I don't know. Like, it's definitely not an obsession. It's definitely not super. Um, I don't feel, I'm not like, let's see, it's not like this obligation at this point, but it is like, this is where I got to go to like find stories. Sometimes I worry about like, I really enjoy doing hard things in so many different ways. Like writing a book is extremely difficult. Getting a 2-year-old to put their shoes on is also extremely difficult. I don't know if I like that much, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. But like running long distances or climbing a mountain is extremely difficult. And I enjoy doing difficult things. I think to a point. But sometimes I wonder, like, if I just keep doing the same difficult things, same types of difficult things, am I really growing as a person? Like,
Yeah.
okay, you ran, 31 miles this race this year. If you do that again next year, is that like progress, or are you just doing the same thing over and over? But I don't know. Um, I feel like I'm just wandering around your question, not really answering it.
Maybe we'll find our way back to it.
Yeah.
Let's talk about purpose. Do you feel like the work that you've been doing, the writing, videos, uh, interviewing, uh, the workshops, you do writing workshops also. Do you feel like this is contributing something to the world, something meaningful? Do you derive meaning from your work, or does it come from other places?
Yeah, I mean, like the absolute best metric I have for that, and this is like something you can only, as far as I know, you can only access through like Instagram, is you can see how many people shared your posts. Um, Not like they literally hit this button that says share and messaged it to a friend or someone. And I assume, based on what my work is about, I assume it's a positive interaction that they're having. Um, or maybe somebody's hate following me and they're like, look at this jerk and what he just drew or wrote or whatever. But sometimes I look at that and like it gets, there's a few dozen or a few hundred or sometimes even like a few thousand shares. And I don't see who's sharing it with people, or, you know, what they're saying to each other about it. But I assume it's this thing where somebody's like, Jeff, this post made me think of you or our friendship because we talked about this 3 weeks ago, or this reminds me of this thing we did a few years ago or whatever. So I think that's the best thing, is that I sit in my little cubicle out here, my office out here, and like try to make something that I hope resonates with people. And maybe they email me and say, hey, this was great. I, lost my dog too, or I'm the father of a 1-year-old, or I ran a race that was really long, or whatever it is. But the better result is these things that I don't actually get to see. It's these connections that people are like, you're helping them stay closer together or keep their relationship going by providing this little piece of art that they share. Um, and for a lot of people, like we all have this, right? Where we go for a hike or a walk or get coffee with somebody and say, hey, did you see this show? Are you watching this show? Are you did you read this book that came out? Or what are you listening? Like, what music are you listening to? And we bond through those pieces of art that we share and both appreciate. So in a small way, that's like the best way I can know that I have any sort of effect on the world, honestly. Because if you think about it, like how many times do you actually just straight up write somebody and be like, "Hey, I really liked your book," you know? I try to do it, but it's
I
not
I
as
try to do it. Yeah.
right. Yeah, I'm like, man, I should just be doing that once a week, but we're all busy. But to see that this actually the stuff is actually being shared between people is pretty cool, and it's a lot more. It helps me keep going a lot more than reading random comments that people leave.
Hmm.
And I'm not sure why they do that sometimes, but
Uh,
so it's like that's the best you can do, really.
yeah.
You don't know. Like if you were just an author, like 40 years ago, you would know that you sold some books. But like I have books that have sold for me really, really well. And I know for a fact that like probably fewer than 5% of people have ever opened that book that they bought. Because of the way it went out in the world. It was like part of a gift package that you could buy. And like it was literally it's like a manual on how to do everything in the outdoors. And like I met a guy once who read it cover to cover, and I was like, wow, wow, you did that. Um, but I have other books that like have sold a few hundred copies, and people have emailed me and said, "Hey, this really helped me get through, um, you know, cancer treatment or my own addiction recovery journey or whatever." And did I make money on that book? Not really. Yeah, but
Mm,
that's pretty cool, right?
hmm.
Like, pretty cool side effect is like actually hearing from someone who you played a small part in their life changing in a positive way.
Hmm.
Um, so.
Talk to me about how the purpose question shifted when you and your wife decided to have a kid, and then you actually did have a kid. When you went from just two people who love doing cool stuff in the outdoors and have freelance writing careers, and I assume more time wealth and more time flexibility,
Mhm.
to where you are now.
Man, I like would like to answer this and not like fall into all the cliches that you hear about having a kid. Because when we found out we were going to have a baby, I immediately started doing video interviews with friends of mine who are dads, and I ended up doing 40 of them, and asking them the same 20 questions. And, I'm eventually going to turn this into a book. I just have to illustrate it at this point. But distilling down this sort of wisdom that people don't even aren't even aware that they have. And you do hear a lot of the same things. And one of the things somebody said was, yeah, it's funny. Like one of the questions was, what's something nobody told you about this, about being a parent? And he said, well, something nobody told me is that there's all these cliches about being a parent, but they're all true. And he's like, so that was a thing. But honestly, like it's really, I don't know how to put this. Like there's this saying that I don't know who like actually said this first. I think it was probably a Knowles instructor or a Outward Bound instructor. But it was, if you always eat your best food first, you're always eating your best food. So it's like you go on a 10-day, 8-day backpacking trip and you bring this huge bag of food or whatever. And, say you really love M&Ms, and you can like try to save all the M&Ms and like ration them out throughout the week, or whatever. Or you can just eat them all in the first 3 days and then they're gone. So your best food that's remaining is your next, that's the best food you have. So now you're eating your best food. Um, and I think like before a kid, what I was doing was still very important to me. Um, like everything was important. Like just I need to travel. I need to find new things to write about. And my art was like literally the most important thing I could do. Besides keeping my relationship with my wife, as good as it always has been. But immediately when you have a baby, it's really hard to be like, no, dad needs to go through hike the Appalachian Trail. It's very important. It's like everything just kind of like the volume just gets turned down. And it's not even like I'm not saying it's in a negative way. It's like it's in a really positive way. Like I literally like the best part of my day, like no matter what happens in my creative life or my, outdoor life, like the best part of my day is often like sitting on the floor of the kitchen with my kid and like listening to him mispronounce grapes, and like learn to talk and like trying to be a real person, or he's an amateur human being is what I call him. But so like we're at the point where we can start adding these things back in and like, okay, what do I actually want to do with my time, and what sorts of adventures can I do and balance that out, and like um it's important to the extent it's part of who I am still, and it's also how I make a living in some way. And sometimes things come along and it's like, this is literally a lifetime, once in a lifetime opportunity. I should take it. But it's like, I'm like, there's such a huge part of me. It's like, I don't actually really want to go and be gone for 11 days. I just want to hang out with my kid.
Mm,
He's going to be 2 for a year, and like when you're going to miss 2 weeks of that year all at once, it's like, oh boy. So I don't know. I was when we were about to have a kid, when we were talking about it, I was starting to enter this, you know, this data have reflected that people enter this sort of, maybe like mild depression or even a severe depression. We used to think it's like a midlife crisis, but it's a U-shaped curve in life where you kind of like get to this point in your 40s where you're like, is this all there is, And I was definitely starting to get that, like, okay, am I just going to keep doing this stuff?
mm,
And I'm like, I think I'd be okay with that. It would be okay, but having a kid was like, it definitely answered that question. No, this is not all there is. There's this huge, huge thing. It's probably the biggest thing you're ever going to do in your life, and that made things, it's like, okay, that kind of pulled me out of that with, maybe not necessarily purpose at first, but triage for sure. You're like, oh my God, this baby, it's like a time bomb. We got to diffuse it like a couple times, like several times a day for like 6 months. It's like, okay. And you're not just being like, you're not staring out the window going, what's my purpose in life? You're like, I just got to get this thing to stop crying, make it comfortable, like feed it, like change diaper, whatever. That's what I got to do, And it's like, yeah, I didn't have time for those thoughts. And now they're starting to, he's 2 and it's our only kid we're going to have, and I'm happy with that. That's good. It's like it's enough of the experience that I can relate to people who have kids, but I can still also relate to people who don't have kids. It's like
mm,
this
mhm.
happy medium, and I'm still getting my ass kicked. I'm like not anywhere close to the person who doesn't have kids, but like you're starting to be able to sprinkle these things back in.
Yeah.
And like it used to be nothing for me to be gone for a couple weeks or whatever, when it was just us, or it was just us and the dog. And now it's like a couple weeks. That's huge. I don't know if I can do that. Even a day, like I went out with a buddy, I was just trying to climb a few new to me mountains, peaks, like kind of hike in and run down if you could, and just do it like semi-efficiently fast. And picked this one and didn't really have that much information on it because there isn't any. And we just got like, it was like you had to climb between 3 different summits to like kind of say you'd done the thing. And we kind of just really got hung up, and we were late. And I was like, man, I was gonna try to be home by the time our little guy got up from his nap at 3. And then it was like, I don't would like to be home for dinner at 5:30 or 6. And I missed, like I left so early in the morning and got home after he went to bed. And I was like really, really bummed about it I mean, I wasn't like crying, but I was like, oh man, I was so disappointed, and it was like one day. Like, I'm
Mm.
not saying I need to be there for every single event in his life, but it was just like I just didn't get to even see the guy today, and that was so tough. Um, and then he was, I was sore the next day, and he was just like totally, his very energetic self, and I just got my ass kicked watching him the entire day. So that made up for it, but it was like it was this thing I never thought I would experience, like, oh wow, I can't believe these feelings. Like nobody told me this was going to happen.
Mm.
But I definitely try to avoid that nowadays, being gone for the whole day. But
Do you think having the kid is somehow related to your shift in your attitude towards your paid work? Uh, when you said earlier, I'm doing the outdoor stuff because this is what my audience, this is where they are, and this is how I make a living. Do you feel like you've moved into a more practical stage of your creative career where it's less about the art. It's less about creating something new and different, and yeah, more security focused.
I mean, um, I think like I was able to do, there were certain things that happened where I was able to like take these big trips and do things that were like what I thought were big adventures. And I thought that's what people want to read about. And that was kind of coming from this sort of like magazine feature writing sense where, it was like, if I want to write for Adventure Cyclist magazine, I could go to Norway and do a 10-day bike packing trip there. And, that was a way to like, that was an easy pitch for the magazine. You're like, oh, it's the scenery sells it, it's fine. Yeah, you can write whatever, go for it. And I knew the tourism people and I'd go there for essentially sort of free, like they would pay for flights and like a hotel on either end. And then we're pretty cheap as far as travel writers go. We're not like, hey, we need to stay at these spas and like, get these like, 4-star restaurants, blah, blah, blah. It was like, yeah, we're literally coming over on a plane. We need one hotel room for 2 nights, get our bikes, ride, one hotel on the other end and then fly home. It's like pretty chill for them. And I could do those things. And it was like, that was, that was easy. And like, I thought I'm not sure that that's what the audience always wants. You know what I mean? Like, I think of like, there's, you follow other adventure people and they're doing all sorts of these crazy trips all over the world, maybe 3 or 4 a year, maybe expeditions where they're like climbing some unexplored peak in Pakistan or whatever, and they're gone for like 8 weeks or whatever. And that stuff is really cool and inspiring. But I've always had like, I know what it's like to be somebody who lives in the Midwest and has a real job and may get to do like one big trip a year, or like, how do we tell stories that that person can relate to,
Mm.
and what winds them up a little bit. And I think that's, like your peers, if you think those people are your peers who are doing all these big trips and living out of a van and like staying out of, real productive society, quote unquote, that might be a small portion of it, but I really think people are following people like me, maybe for like some of that, but I think a lot of people really enjoy these sorts of things. Like, how do I incorporate this into a life that's already very full with other things?
Mm.
You know, and now I'm like, you just kind of aging into it. You're like, well, okay, I'm 45. I got a kid. I got a mortgage, very modest mortgage. It's not like we're underwater or anything, but it's like I kind of have those things, and like I do want to explore closer to where I live. Because I think it's very easy to get on a plane and go to an exotic destination and be like, well, exotic to us, a Western audience. Be like, check out what I saw, and it's way harder to like do those, like tell stories about where you live or these small places that aren't famous, or like kind of take a microscope versus a telescope, or that's probably not a very good metaphor. But like explore where you live and then make it relevant to somebody who lives in, uh, you know, Minnesota, Wisconsin,
Yeah.
somewhere that doesn't have 14,000-foot peaks,
That's
as
the
opposed to like,
origin of
yeah,
semirad.com, right? The origin of the name is that
yeah,
you're not a hardcore adventurer, you're semi-rad. Can you just explain that?
yeah. It was like at the time, it was like I feel like outdoor writing, and this may or may not be true, but this was early. I was getting all my stories were getting rejected by magazines, and I was like, I just want to write like what regular people are doing. I want to appeal to that because I think we would cover all of these sports, quote unquote sports, rock climbing, mountaineering, mountain biking, or whatever. We focus on the people who are the best at it. So it's very similar to how we cover basketball or football or baseball or soccer/football. It's like, who are the people who are the best in the world at this? But the thing that's, you know, most of us who are in our 30s and 40s are not playing American football. It's just not a thing. You need 11 people on each side. You need pads, helmets, blah, blah, blah. So they're all communicating to a completely spectator audience, probably, right? Aside from, maybe some high school, college football players, whatever, and maybe their families. But unlike that, like if you're talking about marathons, there's a million people who run a marathon every year around the world, probably more than that, actually. That's like the estimate, right? And we still focus only on, the front runners, like, oh, here's the top three or whoever's on the podium. But that didn't really grab me about journalism, about this sort of, adventure writing that we did, like who are the best people at it, who are the hardest climbers. I'm like, God, there's so many people who are just like, we just do like, we're pretty average. We got jobs and, credit card bills and maybe families and like all sorts of stuff. And we go to the climbing gym a couple times a week. Maybe we climb outside every weekend or whatever. And we're not climbing the hardest stuff in the world. So what's that experience like? And I feel like being able to communicate what the experience is like does end up being relevant to the people who are the best in the world,
Mm.
but also the people who just do it and like maybe barely finish the ultra marathon. And like when I started drawing charts about trail running and ultra running, it was just like, oh, this is stuff I notice that's going through my head, or this is what happens, or these are like what I think are maybe these sort of things that are relevant or sort of universal to people. And like some of the most successful ultra runners in the world follow my social media accounts. And I was like, oh, that's pretty cool, and you're like, I don't know these people, but I'm like, they must find the humor like relevant, in some way. Or whoever runs their social media account does. I don't know. But I think
Yeah.
that's what I was shooting for, right? Like how does this feel the same to somebody who works a desk job, but also the person who is like, yeah, living out of a van and is a sponsored athlete and, spends their entire year um, focused on what they're going to do to like push the envelope or whatever.
I feel like you're speaking to this little dirtbag within a lot of people out there
Mhm.
who say it does sound fun to totally dedicate yourself to some outdoor sport or pursuit or travel, or even being an artist. But, you know, I have bills to pay. There are realities here. And can someone speak to this messy middle ground for the rest of us?
Mhm.
Well, I can see why you don't want to abandon your audience, Brendan.
Well, it's also like I'm just like a real dude, I'm not really just a regular guy. So, and I think like more and more like, even when I talk at my writing workshops that I teach, it's like that I used to talk a lot about how to pitch publications, and like publications have shrunk. And I've sort of come to realize that not everybody really wants to like, not everybody who comes to that workshop and not everybody who wants to learn how to write has like the New Yorker in mind as their end goal. And I think it's important for people to just write stories about their families, even if it's just like, oh, this will be something, my kids can read. So they'll know more about my mother, or whatever, or her life, like those are important stories. And like very few of us have access to that sort of thing because nobody ever thought to write it down, or whatever. So I want to try to speak to that sort of thing. Like, what are your personal stories that may matter to a dozen people, but may not matter to like hundreds of thousands of people,
Mm.
Like
Hmm.
I think it's equally important, So it's sort of that same ethos, I guess, applied to creativity.
Yeah, you had this great Patreon post called How to Make a Living as a Creative, in which you explained and, of course, illustrated how you've made money over the years and have a great pie chart of your annual income, which I'm sure shifts all the time. For those who cannot see this article magically right now, just tell us approximately where your money comes from, all the different slices in the pie chart.
Yeah. So like I think I actually made that post because I wanted people to know, hey, you're kicking in a couple of bucks a month to this Patreon thing, which is a way of supporting creators, and like here's how important your money is, to me. So at that time, I think this is based on what year what was my taxes? I forget. I just had to literally have to go into my income taxes to find this out because I'm very sloppy with accounting. Um, but 29% of my income came from Patreon, which is, yeah, like I said, people just saying, hey, I like, your newsletter or the illustrations you do. Here's $3 a month or $5 a month or whatever it is. And of course, Patreon takes a chunk of that. Um, so I get whatever that is. But that was 29% of my income that year. The next biggest chunk was merchandise sales because I've sold t-shirts and coffee mugs that I've designed. That seems very lofty. I like put some words or an illustration on a mug and or a t-shirt and people buy it. And that was 29% that year. That has definitely decreased in the last few years. Traditionally published books was 15% that year. That's going to be very close to 0% this year. Because with traditional publishing, you get an advance against your sales, and then your book has to sell. Some of my books have had to sell like 30,000 copies for me to ever see another check. So I must have gotten an advance that year or a payment on something, and that was 15% that year. Freelance work was 17%. I don't do a lot of pitching nowadays, but I have a column for Outside Magazine, which they literally just republish what I put in my newsletter. So there's a,
Beautiful.
yeah, it is too, but it's like without any sort of editorial input. I think they tend to lose a lot of my stuff because they don't know what to do with it, which is fine. I still get paid, so I don't care. But uh, anyway, so and then I'll get the occasional like brand will ask me to do something or whatever. So that was 17% that year, freelance work. And then I had a sponsorship through Arc'teryx, the clothing company that year. That has since ended. That ended in March. And that was 9%. And then I made 1% off of self-published books that year. So you know this too, Blake. Like we've probably self-published about the same amount of books, but you can self-publish them through Amazon and another service called Ingram Spark or Lightning Source. And you get these little checks or direct deposits, and they send you a report every time you get one. But like, I never look at these, but every once in a while I do, and I'm like, oh, cool! I made $1.47 from someone buying my book in Italy, and like, it does amount to generally like a few $100s a month for me, depending on how things are going or if I've been talking about the book or whatever. And I've put resources and money into those self-published books. So it's not like I'm just like raking in, free dough, but like they make a little bit of money, and it helps. I just forget about it because it's just this direct deposit that keeps happening. But if you dig into it, it's like comical. Like on one hand, yeah, I'm going to be an author so I can make a lot of money, and you're like, wow, sold 2 books in Australia this year. But then you can say, oh my God, 2 people in Australia bought my book.
That's
Wow,
right.
that's cool. So I don't know. But that's the whole pie chart. That was the entire thing there.
Yeah. And the merchandise sales, do those come from people reading your posts on your website and then clicking some links and saying, cool hat?
Well, it's probably more often where I say, "Hey, this just so you know, I'm still selling these t-shirts," or I sign copies of my books, and the fulfillment center is actually just at the airport here in town. So I just like drive a few boxes of books out there a couple times a year. So it's like signed books, coffee mugs, t-shirts, some posters, do some limited edition stuff, but generally it's me mentioning that I'm selling stuff and or the holidays. It um, at one point it was bringing in like 30 or $40,000 a year, and it is definitely not now. Just because Instagram has made it very hard for me to anything to be seen, and I've culled back the number of things I'm actually making to like a few things. But there was a point there where I was like really trying hard to sell t-shirts and sell coffee mugs, and they do make fun gifts. And the way it's done for me is they're printed on demand. So I'm not like printing 500 t-shirts and then hopefully selling all of them, but probably not. And then having to like literally create this waste in the world. So you order a shirt, it gets printed, it goes to you. Same thing with the coffee mugs. So that's kind of cool. But it's not a huge risk as far
Mm.
as overhead for me.
Hmm.
Um, But it's been a way of creating art where it's like, okay, I'm selling this thing that says something on it. Do people want to wear this on the front of their shirt? Or would they rather just put it on a coffee mug and maybe not advertise it to the world? Or how does that work? So it's been interesting that way too.
You and your wife both have creative professions, and
Hmm.
you live in a cool university town in Montana, and you're able to build a shed in your backyard. You got some space, and you're raising a kid. Uh, I feel like there's a lot of people who think that even that description that I just laid out feels rather impossible today. And I'm wondering, do you guys have any secrets? Did you get any help from your own family members or any like forms of intergenerational wealth? Did were you able to pull this off as two freelancers genuinely? And perhaps what have you traded? What have you traded away? What have you said no to in order to get to where you are? That's a lot. Sorry.
Oh yeah, no big questions. Yeah, for sure. And like I don't think of myself as having come from money, but I obviously do at some point. Like I graduated undergrad with I think around $18,000 in student loans, but my mom paid my rent when I was in college, which was nice. Even though one of the years I was paying $175 a month to live in an attic. No, 135, I think. Anyway, so there's that, and I think I got a little help from my parents. The last car I bought in 2005. Like I think my dad was like, "We want to send you some money," and I'm like, "Don't, dude, I got it." He's like, and I think he sent me $1,000. So and they had, I have this whole backstory about addiction and recovery, and I was a disaster until I was about 23, and was able to go to rehab while still on my parents' insurance, which was enormous. Um, and then they paid off a credit card I had racked up, I think like $3,000 on at that time, which was massive. This is me just listing off all my privileges here. Uh, and I have not had, and then they moved me to Montana the first time in 2002. So if they were going to total that up, um, that's probably some significant money. And I tried to pay them back by paying for them to go on vacations with me when I was in my 30s, making some money, as a way of saying, okay, thanks for all the, support. But yeah, no, we have not, I have not had a car payment since college. I had a car payment in college a little bit. So 2000, at 2000, I haven't had a car payment in like 25 years. So we just pay cash for cars that are not, they're not nice, Um, and the house, so I got a book contract in 2014, and we had just moved into a crappy apartment on Colfax Avenue in Denver, in out of the van. Well, the van was still there, obviously, but we moved into this apartment. I got this book contract, and it was a big, like, to me, it was a small New York publisher, but to me, it was a big publisher. And they were like, "Hey, we pay you $35,000 advance to do this book." And I was like, "Oh, absolutely! I don't even care what it is." And just broken into three payments of whatever 35 divided by three is, but like 11,667 or whatever. And I was like, this is the biggest check I've ever cashed in my entire life, right? And I write this book, which took several sessions of just like, it was like this how to do everything in the outdoors book. Not like hunting and foraging and stuff like that, but like how to snowboard, how to like set up a tent, how to navigate with a map and compass or whatever. Big amount of work, really paid off well. And so with that advance, I was able to put down, what did we would have put down like a $7,000 down payment on a condo that was 500 square feet in this rotting old Victorian house that had been repurposed. And anyway, it was fantastic dump, but it was I can't believe that house is still standing, honestly. But we bought that condo in geez, 2016? No, 2018. Sorry, 2016. Bought the condo, Central Denver, 2016. Very good time to buy and sell things. All we did to it was put in a new floor and painted some stuff, which is also money from the book advance, and then sold that, bought another place, used the money that we profited from the condo to basically kind of flip this place. It was pretty not awesomely livable. Had bed bugs and a lot of gross things going on. But we sort of just like made it into a home. It was a little duplex and sold that in 2020 and moved here. And we are the people who were like out of state money ruining Montana. Not in a huge way. We're not like rich, but we did buy a house that other people would, probably would have liked. And this thing was a project, man. And it still is in so many ways, but it's very funky. And we don't live, we have lots of friends who live in the nicer neighborhoods in Missoula, and we live in sort of like, we're one of the neighborhoods that orbit the nicer neighborhoods. And we live far from the trailheads, but it's close to me. I'm very excited about it. But yeah, we avoid a lot of the, we don't have nice cars. I don't really identify with, like, the automobile is not really part of my identity. Like, I'm sure, if I was more aesthetically minded, I would not drive a 2015 Subaru Forester because it's just like not an attractive car. But, I'm not like stepping out of the car and like looking around and being like, hey, you guys looking at me? Yeah. It's more like this thing is what I use when I can't bike, or I need to move something heavier than 60 pounds or whatever, and
Yes, it
like,
is a tool.
yeah, it's literally a tool. And the other car we own is, somebody scraped FU into the hood. The windshield's broken. This happened in Denver anyway, it's a whole other story, but it's my wife's car, and she's just like, I really love this car. And I'm like, yeah, it's fine. It still works, but she bought it for $5,000 in 2012, I think, or 13. And it's still cranking, at 200 and
Mm.
some thousand miles. But yeah, we just like, we're not trying to have super nice stuff in very many ways. And I think your question was like, what do you avoid that's like
Yeah,
a
what if you
big.
had to give up or to say no to in order to get where you are?
Hmm.
Nice
So,
cars, clearly.
well, yeah, yeah. And like, I don't know, man. You're a bike guy, and I'm like, no matter how nice the car is, it still sucks to be stuck in traffic in it. Like, and I've always been aware of that. And I'm like, okay, cool. It's got all these features and stuff, but I don't need that in my life. I'm like, it's literally a tool, like you said. So, um, yeah, I don't know. What do we not spend money on? Thankfully, I'm not going to get in trouble for saying this, but the restaurant scene in this town is not that amazing. So it's like, we used to go to a lot of restaurants in Denver and not like, we're not fancy restaurant people. I just like to go to like Mexican joints and Ethiopian restaurants and stuff like that for the
Yes,
experience.
yes.
And, but that adds up. So yeah, we're pretty free from that. Plus having a toddler doesn't means we're not going out very many nights. We don't do a lot of streaming services, like, because we just don't watch a lot of shows. But yeah, I don't know. I don't think we're like, avoiding like things that we really would miss. We do have friends who have like a cleaning person come over and clean their house, and I personally am opposed to that because I just want, you know, Jay, our little guy, to see like that dad cleans toilets. Like that's what we do. I don't want him to grow up and not know how to clean a toilet and like get an
Mm,
apartment and be like, Dad, where's the cleaning lady? And like,
mm, hmm.
I think we could probably arguably afford that, and our house would probably be a little cleaner. But honestly, it's like I feel like it's more honest for me to do that work, and or both of us to do that work.
Hmm.
So maybe having somebody dust would be good. Like if there's just a dusting service. But
There's probably a drone for that.
yeah, right. Oh boy, that'd be something. Yeah. But
Let me
yeah,
get
we're
you.
yeah, sorry.
I'll just hit you with one last question, Brandon, which is because it doesn't sound like you've sacrificed very much to be where you are. And that's fine. That's
Well,
great news.
okay. The trick too is like I should say this is like as far as sacrificing, like we don't we basically don't take vacations, right? Like we're not working for a 2 week stay somewhere. It's like we sort of figure out how to make it part of the job in some way where, okay, we're both traveling there, but we need to take some photos or write about it in some sense so that it can become a business expense. So that's kind of maybe the IRS is going to come after me now, but like everything I've ever done where I've gotten to travel has been something I've written about in some way. So it is part of my job. So we're not socking away money to be like, oh, we're going to try to go to Japan next year. Let's figure out how much money we need. It's more like, well, let's figure out how to make this something that is you're able to write about or tell a story about in some way so
Mm.
that it is part of your business,
Hmm.
which I think is a huge um factor in the fact that we're not that's yeah, we are sacrificing we always call it a semi-paid semi-vacation because we'd be like, oh, we're in Norway, we're on this bike tour. I'm like, okay, can you hold that bowl up and like back up just a little bit, and I'm just gonna try to get some photos of this campsite and like so you're kind of working the whole time, but you're also enjoying it, but it's like you're not relaxing with your feet in the sand, so to speak. So
Yeah. You're talking to
yeah.
someone who has a travel company and can write off literally anywhere
Right.
I go as
Yes. Yeah.
research.
Yeah. As my friend would point out, writing it off doesn't mean you have the money
That
left over.
that
So,
is
but yeah,
correct.
anyway, sorry.
Too
Your last
correct.
question.
Well, you've managed to create this life that started as more of a traditional dirtbag existence, a lot of time in the outdoors, not earning very much money. You were able to develop your freelance writing career, expanded into this small empire, the semi-rad empire, and uh, now you have a life that looks a bit more traditional or conventional, I think, by your own words, and you seem genuinely happy with it. And you've already talked about the joys of fatherhood. I'm wondering if you can close by trying to think of some recent moment where you have been able to take advantage of kind of everything that you've created. I know you said you don't feel like you have a lot of time wealth or a lot of flexibility these days. But is there something you can point to that's like a moment of beauty or meaning or transcendence? Some moment where maybe you're drawing something or you're on an adventure that you're going to write about or you're traveling to meet someone. Someone sends you an email and it reminds you why you decided to lead this life or to build this in the first place. You know, one of those magic moments. Anything pop into your head?
Oh, that's pretty big, man. Uh, yeah, I mean, gosh, bringing it all together is like sort of difficult. And I guess I would just say like every day is really different, but like the focus I have like okay, so the entire to me, this you may have a different definition for this, but like being quote unquote a dirtbag is about freedom, not in the like American man-spreading freedom sense where my rights to do whatever I want trump your comfort or, your experience and I don't have to consider your feelings, but more like freedom that I can do generally what I want to do with my day or my life or whatever in a larger sense. So it's like I wake up today and after we drop Jay off at daycare, one of us bikes him to daycare. I got 8 hours to do whatever I want with. Most of that is governed by what is the deadline for this thing. I need to get this done, and like, so it's not stress free, but to a pretty big extent, I can kind of do whatever I want, provided that somehow it's gonna lead to money or serve some other purpose. So a lot of days I'm able to drop him off at daycare and then ride this ridiculous cargo bike with a seat on the back and this giant basket on the front over to the trailhead and then run up Mount Sentinel here, run down, get back on the bike home. And I don't get home until like 10:45 and then I start working. And work can involve a lot of different things. The creative process is very, it's very nebulous and like things, whatever can be part of your art. So I think the big thing for me is freedom. And if I were to sit back and say, wow, this is great. I'm doing what I want or whatever I want. I should have more of those moments in the day. I'm more of an anxiety ridden person. I'm like, oh God, I got to get this thing done. I got to get done by the end of the week, blah, 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 you know? So that's more of what I think. But in a macro sense, I'm doing less and less stuff that I don't want to do for money. So in general, it's actually pretty fun on a regular basis. And, you know, you get to be generous if you run your own business. If you want to, you know, you can pinch pennies or whatever, or you can just be like, hey, I'd like to give away this product or this thing I made. You know, if you know, to people who support me or whatever. You can choose to try to make money off things. You can try to make more money. You can refuse to work for free. You can, you know, you can ask people for more money, whatever. But it's largely up to you. And it's like I yeah, I am acting on freedom mostly. That's the main consideration, you know. If I wasn't, like, we're able to have Jay in daycare only 4 days a week instead of five because we don't necessarily have to work on Fridays. Generally, a lot of days we like just trade off watching him while one of us works, but we're able to be at home with him and watch him grow up and learn to be a human being. So that's pretty amazing too. But yeah, I would just say freedom is like kind of the main consideration. And like it's lucky to be able to have enough money come in through what you do to be able to say, oh yeah, I can focus on freedom and not money. We could have a much nicer house and nicer cars, or just like, you know, less drafty doors, or you know, whatever. Probably gonna need to upgrade this boiler sometime, but this like, you know, this is what we chose, so it's cool. But yeah, do I ever think about getting a real job? Probably like 3, 4 times a week. Yeah, you know. So
Yet here we are.
here we are.
Brendan, thanks so much.
Thank you for having me, Blake. This is super fun.